Hello and welcome to this ExchangeWire video interview. I'm delighted to be welcoming back a very special guest who spoke at ATS Singapore last year, Josh Gallagher, who's COO of EssenceMediaCom APAC. Welcome, Josh.
Cool. Thanks for having me. It's always good to be here.
Not at all, our pleasure. And for everybody watching, a reminder that ATS Singapore is going to be held on the 3rd of July this year. So looking forward to hopefully seeing many of you who attended last year and possibly some new faces too. So today, Josh and I wanted to talk about a particular issue that's one of the most pressing issues in the industry, and that is measurement and the effectiveness of measurement. So to kick things off, Josh, I wondered if you could give me a perspective on how fit for purpose you feel the current measurement frameworks are that we're using across the industry.
Yeah, so it's a really big question, but I'll try and answer it, and I'll probably answer it in a couple of parts because I think it is nuanced in certain ways, and I'll maybe give some perspective onto why people do still rely on some of those traditional metrics like impression and reach. So I think first of all, I think we all agree that there's definite limitations in those metrics, especially as we have a more complex and interesting media landscape. I think they're problematic because they focus too much sometimes on quantity over quality, and without going into certain areas of the digital ecosystem at the moment, I think that quality is becoming increasingly important, not only in terms of where our advertising is placed, but the people that are actually viewing that and the quality of the brand interaction that is there. So we want the measure to be not just how many people saw something, but if it mattered to them in when they saw it. And that's probably more from a brand perspective. But if we think about those types of performance and ROI clients, they're the ones that are asking us to have a bit of a better view on the customer journey. And it's never going to be perfect. We can't have a single view on that customer journey, but they want us to help them attribute success to campaigns. And some of the traditional metrics, even some of the click metrics that we have, don't really attribute success to campaigns in the way that we want. I think, and I'll give an Asia perspective, I think this is still a topic, and I think those traditional metrics are still a topic because, especially here in Asia, many of our retail partners are offering clients that still type of IO type deal where traffic is the major KPI as opposed to the sale or ROAS. So I think it's still bubbling away in the background. And I think that has exacerbated it. And I know that is still a topic of the conversation out here, where certain platforms and partners are coming back with those kinds of promises to clients. Now, I'll go to the flip side a little bit now, beyond the limitations. I do understand in some sense why they are used in the absence of better metrics or other discussed metrics, or even techniques like MMM that rely on past data as opposed to a bit more real-time data and the data that we're using. And I think the first one is commonality of measurement across platform. Because when we go down into areas where we think about quality, for example, and I was, fairly vocal on stage last year around attention as a measurement metric. And that's not because I don't believe that it's important, and I don't believe that quality or attention are important, but it lacks the ability for us when we effectively cross-screen or cross-channel plan to have one metric that we're using. And I think that's why people in some way fall back on impressions or reach or whatever it might be. The other one, when we get into really specific metrics, is the second one is scale. So many of our clients, and I suppose rightfully so, still want some kind of scale or guarantee of scale in their advertising, even if it's to a cohort of people, and down that kind of addressable route as well. The biggest challenge when we talk about contextual targeting or some of those areas can be scale. And is it relevant enough to enough people to make an impact and make them want to buy something? And then the final one that I think is really important and why people default to old measures is speed. Like, we're living in a really fast retail environment, and out here in Asia, we're living in a monthly kind of retail cycle and you get into Q4 and it's a mega day fest every month, the speed to keep up with measurement and to be able to prove that things are working and being able to change them, I think is why people kind of go back on other areas and other metrics as well. Even when you think about the way that we measure social campaigns or organic campaigns in that way, they only last for 90 days maximum. A cultural trend on a social platform will really only last for 90 days. So for them to us to be able to catch up with a process that gets to a perfect measurement solution or a perfect planning solution, we've missed the trend anyway, and we've missed the relevant moment that we were actually after. So in some respects, I get it. We need a better measurement solution. We need to redefine what those metrics are. Where we kind of fall back on is metrics that don't just show us exposure. They show us engagement, brand sentiment, and ultimately for clients, we talk to them about business goals and how we can measure in a faster way to get them to an understanding of the impact on business goals.
So then extrapolating a little bit on that, because you've given us a really good rundown of your perspective of impression and reach and why they're still so relevant, and some of the tactics and techniques that you use to sort of extend brands to other measurement metrics. Mm-hmm. But accepting that we're in a privacy first landscape, at least globally, I appreciate that in APAC, the picture can be a little more fragmented. Yeah. How do you think that we can use data and addressable measurement in a responsible way? And is there some connection between that and some of the metrics that you're pushing your clients towards?
Yeah, so I think it's really important. Privacy concerns, whether the regulation is out here and as consistent as we would like to, it's still a huge factor in the type of data that we're going to collect and therefore activate against. So when we start to talk about addressability, we do want to be using the most responsible, the richest, but also the scaled piece of data that we can use. I think that the conversation that we're having is around, with our clients on one hand, is around almost data minimization. And so that's only collecting the data that we need for a specific purpose. So that becomes how we can start to be responsible and start to be addressable with that part of data. Of course, we're transparent, there's consent behind it, it's anonymized, but only using data for what we want to use it for. I think and we've had this discussion a lot with our clients lately around how we use that type of data and the value of that data anyway. And some of it is just like reframing the conversation, because we've had clients, and I was talking to a prospective client last week. They had a very strong opinion on not necessarily the responsible use of that data, but how effective it actually is. And their perspective was that the overpromise of one-to-one personalization and the use around that, clients see that micro-targeting as maybe effective, but they don't really want it. They don't think that people want it in that way either. So we talk about the minimization of data, but then the aggregation of data. So again, anonymized data that we can look at targeting people in the right way. And three broad categories that I think help address some of the things that I was talking about before in commonality, scale, and speed when we talk about addressable. So they can be just planned context. They don't need to be, when we talk about data and the use of data and privacy of data, it doesn't need to be one-to-one. I know exactly what you want and how you want to do it. It can just be large contextual buckets of data that we're using, and that's still okay. Some of that, yes, is going to go away in the future, and it's going to become more difficult, but I think that is still, planned context is still going to be really important. Then we go into predicted moments, right? So for a lot of brands, that could be a response to an occasion. We may not know exactly what we're going to talk to them about in that occasion, say a sporting occasion, but we know what's going to happen. We just don't know what the message is going to be. And so that's where we don't need to be one-to-one. We don't need to be personal. We can actually just have a relevant conversation because of that moment. So we need to be smarter in the The one where we get into trouble is more reactive events, where we start to follow people around. And that's still something that we need to do, but we need to have a think about how we do that in the right kind of environment. So I think the first two definitely kind of tick the, do we have a common way of doing it? Probably. Is it scaled and does it have speed? If we keep it simple, it does.
Yeah. And again, I guess that connects somewhat with some of the other metrics that you were describing in earlier on in the conversation, where you're trying to convince brands or trying to get brands focused more on overall business outcomes. You know, ultimately, if they feel very strongly about the ways in which they want to connect with their audiences, then that's going to naturally lead them to something that's a bit more intuitive, a bit more contextual, and you know, something that is a little bit more natural and less one-to-one potentially, depending on the circumstances. So moving on another gear, then give me your perspective on how you think new technology can contribute to improving targeting and measurement, taking into account what we've already discussed.
So I think some of it is around speed. And if I use the example I said before, that maybe traditional MMM doesn't have the required speed and kind of latency to make decisions, and you're using often data from well in the past, is that the right way to predict the future? Is that the right way to then be relevant and talk to your customers? So what we've been doing, and I think, you know, this is common across the industry, is we're using technology to speed up that process, so that you're still using the wealth of information that you need and the wide-reaching scope of that information, but you're using things like machine learning or data automation to actually speed up that process, so you've got kind of timely insights into what you need to do from an audience perspective. And then refreshing that model to make sure that it is at the speed of, as I said, that those retail cycles that are in place. So they need to be not annual cuts of data or refreshes of data. They need to be in time for that flurry of mega day sales that happen in this part of the world towards the end of the year.
So, and obviously, you know, this is a particular topic that I think is at the forefront of everyone's mind, speed associated with tech solutions. You know, we're all keenly awaiting the arrival of AI that's allegedly going to change every aspect of our lives. Not that I want to dive into that area, but, you know, from your perspective, are there particular tech tools that you're already leaning into that are really picking up on that speeding things up process?
There's definitely the optimization, like the suite of optimization tools that are there. I think my caution in that area is that, and as I kind of started, is that it seems like every platform has their own way of using an optimization tool. So then we're back into the situation where we don't have a common way of doing it. We don't have a common way of measuring. We might have platform X's approach to optimization or platforms Y approach, and they're going to be slightly different. Our preference is, yes, that's okay. Our preference is to kind of step back if we can and make sure that we have baseline across everything. Use things, as I said before, like machine learning to speed up the process in a more robust measurement scenario like an MMM, to be able to make those decisions. Because I don't think, like, yes, they're good, and yes, they make life easier, maybe. That still requires human intervention in there. But I want to make sure, again, that we have a really common way of doing it across all platforms. And I think, like, as an agency group, we're trying to do that. So we have something that is more audience focused than it is platform focused in terms of the way that we're able to optimize. It's more perfect, but it's not perfect.
Yeah, I understand. And that was leading me into my next question, which was going to be around the challenges that you feel that advertisers are facing when they're trying to implement really effective measurement strategies across different platforms and different devices. You've already touched on it a little bit there, you know, the inconsistency in particular platforms and what might be required to utilize those. But talk me through some of the other challenges you think your clients are facing when trying to implement really effective and consistent measurement strategies.
I mean, I think one of the biggest the biggest challenges is not the tech challenge. It's the shift away from what we've been doing in the past. And if you take the example of certain platforms that they're used to and have always sat on a media plan or within a communication strategy that have data that sits in a silo, that have limitations around the measurement capabilities or the ability to standardize or have a cross-platform measurement solution, that's when some of our, I think that's the biggest shift for our clients, is to reframe the media plan and then be able to and to work around that. I think that there's improvement in some other areas of business, like programmatic, for example. I think for a long time that was not seen as a desirable place for people to advertise. And that's probably an industry problem and the way that we spoke about programmatic for the last 10 years. But I think what programmatic has now, if we take it as a cleaner ecosystem than potentially it was before, is that you have more control in the way that you measure, in the way that you serve media than you might if you have a single platform approach. What that gives is that you give brands more confidence in getting the right price for targeting, the right audience at that time, but also control over the messaging and the measurement along there. And I think that now that we have additional areas within the programmatic sphere, things like CTV, that gives the scale and audience to be able to do it. So for me, that's a really interesting, CTV is a really interesting area for me because it gives a little bit of extra scale in audience reach, again, solving some of the problems that I spoke about before, but also screen size. You're moving from an environment which is like a really small mobile screen into a bigger screen environment across those channels, and the ability for us to control the messaging and also control the measurement that sits around it.
And that's a really great segue into the final point that I wanted to pick up on in this chat, which is concerning the opportunities potentially available to advertisers in a connected TV environment. In your opinion, how is addressable measurement evolving to accommodate the way that consumers' habits are changing within a TV landscape? You've already mentioned it's, I guess it's not just a matter of people now consuming TV in a connected environment as opposed to a linear environment. It's also a matter of considering what type of devices those consumers are using. I know they're in APAC, you'll have a lot of audiences that are probably still consuming a lot of content in a mobile environment, but you've got the opportunity to push those audiences to larger screens. So talk me through where you think there are opportunities there for advertisers and, what's happening to address addressable measurement in that kind of context.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the bigger opportunities are obviously access to audiences and access to audiences in a different way. But we need to make sure that we're developing measurement models for things like CTV that are able to be as accurate as what we're used to in attributing the brand impact or the conversion of someone that's sitting in their living room, not on the go on their phone, where we've kind of got used to how people are interacting with a website or a marketplace or whatever that might be. So I think that gives us an opportunity to, if we think about it and do it in the right way, demonstrate real results of those platforms, and not in the same way that we thought about results in a linear TV world, which may have been reach impressions or whatever that metric was, that we can deliver more relevance, more personalization at that scale and have a measurement place to be able to do it. I think the final thing for me on that one is that I think it's a really interesting inflection point for us, because cookies never worked or were never usable on CTV anyway. So we're going to get into a place where we're not be able to use them anywhere. So we may as well start developing that solution now, because they were never part of that targeting, or it wasn't contingent on cookies alone anyway. So it's a really nice place for us to restart the conversation, look a little bit into the future, and include a lot more in the way that we're measuring.
Fantastic, Josh. There's many more questions I'd like to add to that, but we've run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us on this ExchangeWire video interview. And we're going to look forward to seeing you in Singapore in a few months' time.
Cool. Thanks for having me.